Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Harry Jackson Show. I'm your host, Harry Jackson. I want you to reach out to us this morning at Bishop Harry, hashtag the Harry Jackson Show, and we will respond to you on the air. Well, I hope your weekend was very, very good. Today, we are going to be talking about the ignored irony of the Syrian plan. We'll obviously talk about it at the open, but later on, Vern Vernucci, editor-in-chief of the New York Analysis of Policy and Government group, and I think I've got that name just a little bit off, and we'll correct it in a moment, but I've got the name correct, Frank Vernucci. And so reach out to us. Also, you can hit us at the web at theharryjacksonshow.com. Last week, we opened up the phones and said we'd give out 10 copies of this book, You Were Born for More, and you guys reached out, got those copies so quick. I thought that it was amazing, and we're going to be offering some books later again in the week, and we want to encourage you to put a rating, a good rating. Negative ratings can stay to yourself, keep to yourself.
Right, it's a good book.
It's a good book, but we need some 5 ratings out there on Amazon. We need some folks who may want to download the book, You Were Born for More, by Harry R. Jackson Jr., and I think it would be a blessing to many folk who are, in fact, going through problems, actually challenges in their lives, where they need to redeem the time, get a new start, maybe family, financial, health, a myriad of different issues in our lives, and we're going to tune in to God's purpose and destiny for our lives. But this morning, we want to start off by asking you to weigh in on what should be story number 3 today, and that is the story of the NAACP president will resign at the end of the year. Yay! Says a whole bunch of people in the audience and the studio. But his stats are amazing, and meaning he's taken the organization to new heights in terms of membership. He has over quadrupled the finances. We'll be specific a little bit later. But the reality is that a lot of people think they're moving in the wrong direction now. No longer an exclusive forerunning civil rights organization, howbeit left-leaning. They have become advocacy for gay marriage group. They have watered down their understanding of what their mission is as it relates to African Americans specifically. They were part of the angst, the fly in the ointment, if you will, in the Trayvon Martin murder trial of George Zimmerman. And so we've got all these things that they're about. What say you? And we'll respond to you on the air. Say your name unless you are my mother tweeting one more time, in which case we won't mention her wonderful name. But you can weigh in, and it would be appropriate at the top of the hour. Another major question is, are we headed for another 2008 financial crisis? Could it happen again? I am concerned that I don't need the value of my house to go down again. Washington, D.C. has only been hit really by 5% over the aggregate long-term level of housing. Commercial real estate was much more impacted in that process. But we're wondering whether you feel that we're headed for another time. It looks like the stock market and all other kinds of investment instruments have, in fact, been increasing finally. Maybe people are just getting used to the new normal. We know that we're still over 7%, and job creation rate is not increasing. Many permanent people off the rolls. Are we really, as USA Today says, on the front page in a financial crisis that cannot be returned from? Or we're going back again to the dark days where, fortunately, we did not have the suicide rates that they had during the Great Depression. What say you? 3 more stories we want to touch this morning, the remaining opening time, but we'll slow down after this introduction and include David Perlett in the discussion with Syria, with the people who are looking to us for support. What say you? We know we're going to do a whole segment with Frank Venuccio, but Dave Perlett, are you for action in Syria or not as of today, or have you flip-flopped on me?
I am not in favor of action in Syria at the moment because the plan is not clear.
All right.
It's just not clear. Should we help people? Sure, we should always help people in need, but the plan that currently the president has is very unclear, and we could end up in more trouble with the world, with China, with Russia, and in the end, we may actually put the wrong people in power.
Well, I am for it. We disagree. I'm concerned about the things that you are concerned about. And I think, though, that we're at the point where I believe it is a group in Iraq, one of the tribes, where if you pull your sword or your knife and you don't go to war, you have to cut your own hand, draw some blood. It's that serious. From my exposure to some of the military people who've been exposed to the field, it will actually bring shame and dishonor to them. So in deference to them, even though we may say, what's the big deal? And because of the impact, we want to ask Frank Vernuccio about this later on in his segment, what will be the impact for our fight with the Islamic world. And I think that may be why, Britain did a lot of saber rattling, but I won't go on and on. We'll have a whole time to talk about it. So our positions are noted. You may want to tweet us. Let us know what you think about Syria today. Are you in which camp? And the lawmakers, Dave Perlett, 44 lawmakers, say they are in favor like me. It's good for me to be in the minority, I guess. What is not being shown is the exact breakdown in terms of houses. I'm looking at USA Today front page.
I think they had 20-some senators, Democratic senators, that are in favor, and the equally number opposed Democratic senators.
Yes, it looks like 22 and 22 House members and senators that are the total of that 44, and which seems like an abysmal number. And, you want to ask the folks out there, or I want to ask my lawmakers, are we really up to our job? These are tough decisions. The statement would be, no, let's not go. It may not be courageous, and it may not be right. 149 lawmakers opposed. I understand that, just as you and I have different sides of the equation. But those numbers only add up to 193. Therefore, 340 folk, the majority of the people representing us in these wonderful, august offices that rule the land, say they're undecided. Really now? How can you be undecided? We've been talking about this for quite a long time, right?
Oh, yes.
And we also had last week a whole week of discussion, correct?
Yes, we did.
So I'm not buying the fact that they're undecided. Are they waiting for another poll?
They're waiting for more information. Yes, from the president and his administration.
Okay, I think that President Obama may well be, according to some, one of the smartest guys that has sat in the office. That's what they say. And along the lines, if Solomon was smart, he really was dumb with relationships. All his wives, all those gods, all those problems. I think we may have a similar kind of problem with President Obama, but I don't think that it's within his capacity at this stage to discern and or articulate in great specificity, this not being his long suit, what the appropriate plans of action are. I'd love to see them step up and make a difference and tell us what they think. I'm talking about our lawmakers, and get a decision. So 340 saying they don't know what they want to do. Kind of sounds like dereliction of duty.
They're undecided because they're still waiting to find out who drew the red line. Did the president or did the world?
Well, I know who drew the red line.
He got off his teleprompter. That's who drew the red line.
That's right. Some speechwriter drew a red line, and none of us thought that we were going. It sounds dramatic. None of us thought. I know that he probably realized that we were going to take action, and there have been some changes behind the scene for and against. And my honest assessment would be that red line was drawn. They're prepared to move. Delay happened. Then the minds were changed. Then something else happened that we are not aware of. And only will memoirs tell us the story. Well, it's going to be interesting. We're going to talk more on Tuesday about the 2008 financial crisis. Could it happen again? And also big in the remaining few minutes of this opening segment before we come back to Frank Vernuccio. We have got a big thing happening in America today. What is that big thing, David Parlett? Big on your list of important things that you've got to look at in your life.
Oh, you're talking about the NFL tonight for our team, our home team.
How did it take you so long?
Golly gee, we just cannot wait until the showdown between RG3 and Michael Vick tonight here at FedEx Field.
Folks, off the cameras and the mic, David Parlett is an ardent football fan. And to show that he is somewhat delusional in his free time, he really believes that the Redskins are going to win some games this year. And I am a fan, but I'm at the point, I hate to say, that I'll see it when, I'll believe it when I see it, that they're going to turn the year around. I know that's not a popular thing for a Washington fan to say, but I think with our management, we have this habit of choosing coaches, and before they get themselves moving, we always change them. And then it looks like we get a few players that are willing to do something. And when they get into a slump, we change them quickly too. So I think the only thing that's been consistent about the Washington Redskins in the last almost 15 years has been that we've been up at the top of the charts in terms of making money. And the guy that currently owns them is doing quite well, thank you. But
Dan Snyder's laughing all the way to the bank.
Well, maybe that's part of his equation. If we lose, then Dan says we win.
That's right.
I don't know exactly how that works. Most other teams take a different tack. Which one of the games did you all like out there in Tweet World? What did you think of the game between
San Francisco and Green Bay, where San Francisco and the Anquan Bolden game last night I thought was fabulous, exciting. Colin and Anquan hooked up for over a couple hundred yards. It was a great game. Aaron Rodgers did his best, but he could not stop the San Francisco 49ers.
Now, the guy's name is messing with me. You didn't say Antoine, you said
Anquan.
Oh, see, all night I kept trying to, the perfectionistic English major that I am, want to say, what? Say that again? Yeah.
Yeah. He was the big Super Bowl winner here in Baltimore. And so one brother, head coach of Baltimore Ravens, turns over the major receiver for Baltimore Ravens over to San Francisco 49ers to the other brother. There's a little money involved. Anquan's getting a whole lot older, but the boy still performs in a clutch play. You want somebody to score a touchdown and receive the ball. He's the man.
Well, no offense against he or his mother and father, but you wonder whether when he was born, they wrote something down and it was misread, or I don't know. That's ever since slavery. That's how black folk have wound up with these crazy names. And then to adjust everything after it was all done, the black Muslims came up with this brilliant idea that they were going to reject the slave name, so they'd give you X as a final name. Well, urban America definitely has been challenged in their names. I wonder what kind of name we'll make for ourselves as a nation as we look at Syria. We'll be talking very specifically about that right after this break on the Harry Jackson Show.
With today's Faith to Action commentary, here's Janet Porter.
A 10% increase in school district spending. With that, one may think that the students in Chicago public schools would see some big improvements this year. But they will not be seeing any real benefit from it. In fact, there will be a decrease of $68 million in classroom spending. That's because the district, which has debts totaling $1 billion, has to make $405 million in payment to the union employee pension plan. While the education for thousands of students suffers with cuts in programs and classes, the liberal union gets richer. This is just one of many problems that plague the government schools in Chicago and across the nation. One more reason for parents to get and keep their children out.
Visit f2a.org for more commentaries and action steps, along with news, links, and much more for your state. Go to f2a.org.
For 2,000 years, Jesus has been judged by how well his followers have imitated him. And sometimes they've made a terrible mess. Even the best of his followers has lived the lifestyle of Jesus imperfectly. And that's given people a reason not to follow Jesus themselves. You may be one of those. You've seen the hypocrites and the confusing divisions. There have been so many wrongs committed in the name of Christ. You may have been personally wounded by a Christian. But none of that was from Jesus. Jesus said, "Follow me." He didn't say, "Follow my followers, my leaders, or my religion." Jesus died in your place for all of your sins. He rose from the dead and offers you forgiveness and eternal life. If your trust is in anything other than Jesus, you're hanging on to something that simply will not save you. Only Jesus can do that. Will you follow Jesus? To learn more, call 888-NEED-HIM. That's 888-NEED-HIM, or visit needhim.org.
The phrase, "ain't nobody got time for that," was made popular by a woman who was running from an apartment fire. She was running for her life, not even taking time to grab her shoes. I began to think about that in the context of our lives and how we literally push and pull and we blow and go day in and day out, not ever really taking the time to get what we need for ourselves or do what we need to do for ourselves. Something has to change. We do everything we can for others. We take care of the house, the husband, the children, and all those who grace our doorsteps in distress. But we never take time for ourselves. As a daughter of Zion, you cannot give from a place that's dry and empty. Today, take time for you and allow God to refresh and renew you in the dry and empty places of your life. There are those counting on you to grab your shoes. I'm today's urban woman, Tony Johnson, with a heart for the urban family. Learn more at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Welcome back to the Harry Jackson Show. And you can reach out and tweet us at Bishop Harry, the Harry Jackson Show. We want to respond to you on the air. And listen up, later on in the week, we're going to give out more free copies of You Were Born for More. But you can get a copy for family and friends by reaching out. And you can get it at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, much to my encouragement. Has got lots of copies. We want them to fly off the shelf. And so, Harry Jackson Show. But today I'm going by Harry X, just to emphasize the uniqueness of my name, since we were talking about Anquan. We'll come back and talk about that a little bit later on. We've got some in-house theories. This is all for fun about how he got that name and what you do. And one of my kids has an unusual name. What you do when you have an unusual name, and if you survive, it will only make you stronger. But like the boy named Sue, sometimes it's too much for you. Well, moving on to a very serious topic, Frank Vernucci is here, and welcome to the program today, Frank.
Henry, it's great to be with you again.
Great. And you are an editor-in-chief of which magazine? And can you give us a
The
little
New York
bio
Analysis
on...
of Policy and Government.
Okay. And what is the flashpoint or focus of, we know you're doing policy and government, you are a conservative organization, or how would you summarize the trajectory or direction of your organization? Or I should
Well,
say
we try
of
to
your
take one
writing.
major issue each week and try to get a rational, no-holds-barred discussion of it so that our readers get essentially an executive briefing on the topic. And we find that far too often the major media is either biased or relatively uninformed. They kind of give a surface description of what the problem is rather than what the real issues are. We have this 24-hour news cycle throughout America, but rather than getting more in-depth to the news, we seem to get the same somewhat biased reporting over and over and over again, and really not adding that much to the public conversation.
Well, I think certainly that's an accurate, your analysis of what's happening in the news cycles are accurate, and we're glad to have you back in that you have a very balanced and clear understanding. So why don't you unpack to us some of the ironies of the Obama Syrian plan versus maybe history, Bush and other folks have the approaches they've taken?
Well, if you recall, back in 2003, then-Senator Obama claimed that there were no weapons of mass destruction such as sarin gas in Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And, of course, just before coalition forces began their attack on Saddam Hussein, the Israeli Secret Service, the Mossad, clearly found evidence of trucks and cargo planes leaving Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, and taking that material to, of all places, Syria. Now, President Obama wants to have the United States go into Syria to destroy, hopefully, those weapons which he claimed never existed in the first place. So the irony is certainly almost too much to believe. Now, all those same Hollywood folks who soundly condemned President Bush, and unfortunately far too much of the media that soundly condemned President Bush,
and they call him a liar,
cheering
too.
for President Obama.
No, you do bring up a great point. And they called him a liar. I mean, help me with this, and if this is kind of off
That's right. They
track.
said Bush lied and people died, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if it's off track, what I'm going to say next, then you can just move on. But I have been amazed at Colin Powell, the statements he made about, they lied to me. I mean, before he switched ships in terms of his conservative versus liberal stances, and then ultimately following Obama and being one of his arches or strongest supporters, I thought that his statements were overblown. I never understood it. You have any clarity? It's amazing these weapons moved to Syria. It's amazing also that Colin Powell has never acknowledged that. What say you?
Well, Henry and David, you're absolutely right on this because, but it's part of a wider problem that I think is very worrisome to me. Far too many actions taken over the past 4.5 years in the Obama administration have really, from an objective viewpoint, forget the partisan politics for a second, but just from a pure objective viewpoint, have simply not worked well for the national security of the United States. And I believe far too many active and retired military have not stepped up to the plate and really forthrightly speaking their mind on this particular issue. Look, I understand the concept of loyalty to the commander-in-chief and all that, but ultimately the loyalty of the military is to the United States Constitution and to the people of the United States. The commander-in-chief is their representative. And what we've seen on a number of occasions has been a failure on the part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and some military men like retired General Colin Powell to really bring their expertise to the table and really state the obvious. that the national security of the United States has been jeopardized by the incompetent decisions of this administration.
Wow, you said a mouthful, but I think we would certainly agree with you. I really had taken some slaps, if you will, as an African American, being willing to be against this foreign policy for a long time for bunches of reasons, and so it's good to hear someone such as yourself with the background to say it. Now, how would you contrast Obama's interaction with Congress and the, what would you call it, the steps up to attacking, compare and contrast those versus his rhetoric of the past?
Well, again, talk about irony. It's sort of amusing that this president, who coined the phrase, "we can't wait," as a way of saying that he was going to move ahead without Congress in so many different areas, now after the Brits turned him down, after the alliances around the world, basically America's traditional alliances, have abandoned him because he failed to enunciate a clear goal in Syria, now all of a sudden he feels obligated to go to Congress, but only because of the public relations angle. And we can't forget also that senior White House consultant David Axelrod very happily tweeted the other day that this was a great political maneuver because if things go right, President Obama will take the credit. If things go wrong, he'll blame Congress. Playing politics with the national security of the United States is a very bad and very dangerous thing to do.
Well, I would agree. It's interesting you mentioned Axelrod. He's my favorite player on the Obama administrative or teams, or historically on the teams, in that some of the stuff that he says and does seems so wild from my perspective. But what's amazing is that often he calls the temperament or things that will be responded to by the American public. He was right enough to get the guy elected. He was right enough to help them make a lot of decisions. But, you know, it's sort of like having your own political Darth Vader working against you. You hate it when his judgments turn out right despite sometimes the either deception or lack of judgment that are involved. So what would you say if the Congress says no? Well, Senate, let's say, start there. Senate says yes, Congress says no, perhaps. What would you say
Well, under
then?
the War Powers Act, of course, that would make it illegal for the president to move into Syria. But
Thank
then
you.
again, this is the same president who ignored the War Powers Act when he went into Libya. My analysis of foreign affairs is that this is a very dangerous world, and I'm not by any means a dove. I certainly think that the United States need to have a very muscular foreign policy. However, I think that it should be muscular when the United States needs to protect its vital interest. And unfortunately, in the case of Libya, last year at this time, or actually a little bit over a year ago, and in the case of Syria, there's no vital American interest involved. Now, we can talk about humanitarian matters, but the president is being very selective. We know, for example, that the Boko Haram in Nigeria, a terrible terrorist group, has been killing people en masse. The president has ignored that. He ignored the fact that in Egypt, Coptic Christians were being killed by the very man that he, President Obama, helped put on the throne, so to speak. And of course, he ignores North Korea, where an entire nation has been turned into a concentration camp, and we don't hear the president saying anything about that. So,
Wow.
Possibly the president has some humanitarian impulses in Syria, but it's rather strange that all of a sudden it came about. And I think to some extent what's going on here is the president simply backed himself into a corner, thinking that this would be resolved somewhat other than through unilateral American action, but it didn't work out, and now he's stuck. So we're facing the potential of going into combat more to save the personal reputation of the president than to achieve any reasonable goal. And again, that goal is an important thing because the president has not convinced anyone that the goals make any sense. He is not trying to knock Bashir al-Assad out of power, the president of Syria. He says he's not there to destroy Bashar al-Assad's armed forces, nor has he given a reasonable way of assuring the American public or the international community that if Bashar al-Assad is knocked out, that somebody like al-Qaeda or the Muslim Brotherhood won't simply step in and take over.
Well, you certainly have a gift of clarity and explanation, and you, in a very short time, have made a lot of sense out of it. Let me hit you with one last question, because it seems so senseless. My biggest concern now is the sense of, this is a bad word, dereliction of duty that our military may have. Well, you drew the line, you put our reputation on the line, now you won't do what you're supposed to do, Mr. President. So some officers have said to me. Second, how do you feel the Islamic world seeing us not having the follow-through to do anything? Wow. What does that say in this environment? Would you address those?
That's a great question, because a lot of the defiance from Syria is a direct result of the failure of this administration to take any substantial reaction to the attack on our facility in Benghazi. And it goes a bit further than that as well. Last August actually of 2012, not 2013, Chinese naval vessels sailed into the Philippines and occupied an offshore area belonging to that country. Those two shining examples of weakness on the part of this administration has emboldened those who are opposed to the United States to basically kick sand in our face and ignore anything that this administration says. So, you know, the projection of weakness to the Arab world and to the world community as a whole really is a substantial problem, and it's one that's going to have very dangerous results. We know, for example, right now in Syria, that both Russian and Chinese forces, and now I understand Iranian forces as well, are massing in opposition to the United States. So this has all the potential of being a flashpoint that, if one miscalculation is made, could wind up into a much wider and much more serious war. And a war at a time when the United States military has been slashed to the bone. It's a very dangerous time and a very dangerous situation.
Well, this really is disconcerting. Again, not speaking to your communication skills, but rather because you're making it so clear, it doesn't seem like there is, I don't want to say a winnable situation, but we're stuck in a tough spot. Decisions have been made. We're backed into the corner. Now, I want to take kind of issue with something you said, and you have about a minute to be the spokesperson to convince people that this is personal from Obama versus saving face. Are we at the point that saving face for Obama is synonymous with saving face for the nation? If not,
well, actually, that's actually not a bad point, because again, we have one president at a time, and if the president of the United States is considered not up to his word, not backing it, it certainly will have ramifications to the credibility of the United States as a whole. And this is the terrible result of an incompetent foreign policy. The president is not a lone actor. He is the president of the United States, and his credibility in the United States pretty much are the same thing. But there's the other part of it as well, which is his failure to follow through and punish Islamic extremists after Benghazi. His failure to protect our ally in the Philippines means that other nations around the world believe it is okay to defy the United States. And again, it raises a flashpoint that none of us really want to see.
Well said. How can folks get a hold of you, Frank Vernuccio, and your publication?
Hey, thank you for asking. We're at usagovpolicy.com, and if any of your listeners would like a free subscription to our weekly newsletter, they can do so by simply sending their email to usgovpolicy@gmail.com.
We'll mention that right after the break as well. Thank you, Frank. Stay tuned to the Harry Jackson Show. We'll be right back.
What's the difference between going to church each Sunday, listening to a sermon, and a self-help seminar? Some people, I think, mistakenly assume they're one and the same. They're not. Jim Garlow here with the Garlow Perspective, trying to make a distinction between a typical positive mental attitude seminar or a self-help seminar that are popular across the nation and a sermon on a Sunday morning. As I'm preaching the Word on a Sunday morning, my goal is not self-help. It's not self-advancement. It's not self-improvement. It's not even self-actualization. It's about Christ exaltation. Quite a difference. Now, the truth is that if you Christ exalt, you will self-help. If you Christ exalt, you will self-improve. If you do Christ exalt, you will self-actualize. But my point is I don't start with self, I start with Christ. Exalt Him, the other stuff comes together. Jim Garlow, Renewing American Leadership.
Where does a father learn fathering? Dr. Tony Evans offers his personal example as he brings us the alternative view.
Well, my great illustration is my own dad. And when he was converted, and he would begin having spiritual times tied to us being around the dinner table, whether it was prayer or a Bible verse that we memorized or something principle he was reviewing. I kind of learned from him how important it is to use the gathered family around the table for leading your family and for imparting spiritual principles and spiritual truth into their lives. So I have to credit my father with influencing me in that direction. Because of the influence of my dad, because of the primacy that the Bible taught about family, because of the theology that I came to learn in developing the kingdom agenda and its philosophy and the foundation of family as being the keystone of civilization, and because of the demise of the family in the contemporary culture being led by the defections of fathers, all of that came together and intersected for a heavy burden for the family, and my desire to see the family strengthened and men to step up to the plate and become the kingdom men that they were created and designed to be, along with women becoming the kingdom women they were created and designed to be. So all of that came together to create this great burden for the restoration of the family. I saw what happened when God redeemed our family, so I wanted to see God do that in other families as well.
For an in-depth look at what it means to be a godly husband and father, check out Dr. Evans' best-selling book, Kingdom Man. It'll teach you how to follow God's agenda for the home, work, at church, and in society. Get a copy for yourself. Details on Kingdom Man are waiting for you online at tonyevans.org. You've been listening to The Alternative View.
Welcome back to the Harry Jackson Show. We've been asking you to reach out to us by Twitter at Bishop Harry, hashtag the Harry Jackson Show. We will respond to you on the air. I promised if anybody other than my mother sends in a response, then we'll actually call your name. And, my mother, my wife, my daughter, all of those folks will be excluded. And so we need you to interact. It enriches the discussion. And you've been very, very vocal on and around the issue of Syria. We just heard from Frank Vernuccio, editor-in-chief of the New York Analysis of Policy and Government. And you can reach out to get his write-up and his thoughts that he deals with something in depth for an entire week, as he said, usagovpolicy.com, usagovpolicy.com. Also, what's interesting about Frank is that he's also on a radio show on WVOX in Westchester, New York with Larry Allison. The show is called And Nothing But the Truth. And I like that name, and because one of the websites you can get us at is The Truth in Black and White. And so it was interesting to hear his perspective, and he's had background and worked with both Democratic and Republican administrations. So I like the fact that there is a clarity that he is bringing forth that makes a lot of sense to me. And I disagree, though, that we should just sit and do nothing. I understand that there could be warfare that's taking. You heard something about from General
Jerry Boykin.
Yeah, my dear friend Jerry Boykin.
Dear friend, who I heard him tell a large audience that you, Bishop Harry X, is it Harry R. Jackson,
Harry,
are
No.
one of his heroes.
yes, Harry X. Since I joined and backslid from the black Muslims, yeah. Sorry.
That you are one of his heroes. Listening to him last night, he felt it really was, in light of the administration's lack of strategy, lack of plan, very limited attack, he felt it would be a major mistake right now to go into Syria. It's something that should have been done. That's a past. But he said they need much greater strategy, much bigger plan. Otherwise, it's such a tinderbox. It could set off a massive war if done improperly.
Yeah, I think so. I'm very, very concerned about the consequences. When you get into these kinds of situations and you have these kinds, I hate to say it this way, but forgive me in advance, these kinds of egos, not just from individual leaders, but international entities, there's a corporate esprit de corps that is taken on by the ruling bodies of these nations. And when they come to a certain fanatical fever pitch, that's how wars have started in the past, certainly. It was never just one man. It may be one man's fire spreads, but on many, many cases, a book, a letter, a story, an editorial, a speech can be so incendiary that it becomes the express will of a group of people. So we don't know. But sitting back doing nothing, especially after, if you buy what our dear friend Frank said, that the weapons of mass destruction started back in the Bush era, that this is in fact, going to war would be in fact a acknowledgement that Bush didn't lie. Weapons of mass destruction did go to Syria. The sarin gas was involved. I don't know how we honorably adjust this, but I will leave that for a moment and we'll hear what the Senate and Congress have to say. I am very concerned that there's a reason behind the reason, that there's a motive behind the actions. I cannot believe that the president is just doing this in order to save face for himself. And therefore, if he goes ahead anyway, without the approval of Senate and Congress, we're going to have problems. Well, we got a tweet, and that was significant from Reverend C.W. Bruce. He says, I didn't know that there was a resignation. What are your thoughts? Well, I was shocked by it as well. Front page of the, or actually USA Today, under the Nation, has a huge picture of, this is she. Excuse me, ma'am. And what we find is that there's a big picture of Jealous, and there is a whole layout. And it seems, I wasn't aware either, it seems as though there must have been some exclusive given to USA Today. Typically, that's how these things work, although Washington Post also, ironically, Monday, and again, I didn't hear any inklings of this over the weekend, we find a big picture, Jesse Jackson, Al Sharpton, Benjamin Jealous, and then I believe this is this Mrs. Martin there behind them? They're protesting the Trayvon Martin case. I'm wondering, there's several shots, one in USA Today, one in Washington Post, that have the three of them Ben Jealous, Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, discussing the Trayvon Martin situation. And for a 40-year-old, I think he's done an amazing job, except that I'm concerned about the direction of the organization. If I had drank the Kool-Aid of the left-leaning liberal organizations who take all of our concerns about marriage and life and family as though it's only political rhetoric from the right, I think that's how they assuage the consciences of many of the ordained ministers that are actually members of the NAACP and other groups. They basically say, yeah, if the Republicans, if Jackson, if the conservatives, someone Harry Jackson, and others were sincere about their points of view, then I'd be outraged about marriage, about life, about family. But I don't think they're sincere. And the biggest problem in the nation actually is poverty and racism and a lack of justice. So they justify the imbalance of their response by looking at the paradigm that we've picked up over the years, where we say righteousness and justice are the foundation of God's throne. We want, from a Christian worldview perspective, to be advocates for righteousness, meaning these things protecting the life of the unborn. That's just right. It's honoring the commandments of God, Old Testament and New. Protecting marriage, clearly, is a way to go. Protecting many of these fundamental issues. I'm against gambling. I'm against a lot of the drug legalization because of how it will impact the choices and lifestyle of individuals. But on the other hand, there are some justice issues, meaning why do we still have institutional poverty, institutional racism, rather, at certain levels within our nation? Those kinds of things, meaning why are some governmental systems, structures, and policies set up in such a way that there is a disproportionate harm that comes to one group or another? I still think that there is an advocacy for the poor that blacks are supposed to have, but more than blacks, Christians should have, based on the word. And what I find lacking is substantive work on the issue of poverty, on the issue of the least of these within the ranks of this organization. The prison complex. I've accepted a position to be on the board of the Prison Fellowship. Great organization. And NAACP is not working with Prison Fellowship. They're talking about the fact that we can predict test scores that will put many African Americans in prison. We find it out in the third grade, but after that, there's no follow through. There's no advocacy. There's no policies. Jesse Jackson has made speeches for years, but are they that weak and politically impotent that they cannot do anything to change these topics? So I find an organization adrift, a young, aggressive man who's done a great job with what he had to work with, but as the famed Stephen Covey talked about in his 7 Habits of Successful People, when you've got your ladder placed against the wrong wall, all your energy, all that you fight for, essentially comes to naught. So, C.W. Bruce, thank you, ma'am, for your question. And I'm very concerned that our nation is simply morally adrift, that this organization that used to be made up predominantly of ministers now has not only a viewpoint that is in many cases non-Christian in terms of following the book, but also not even helpful from a practical, sociological, or historical context. So that's what I think about that one. Anyone else wants to weigh in, we'd be glad to have a tweet from you at Bishop Harry, hashtag The Harry Jackson Show. If your tweet is a little bit redundant, covers things we've already said, then we won't read it over the air. And if you are my mother, thank you, Mom, we won't read yours on the air.
I think what you said is so critical, that a Christian worldview is the essence of how we should handle these issues, whether it's poverty, whether it's education, whether it's prison reform, whether you're dealing with marriage or the unborn. These are the major issues that we really, and the NAACP, should be concerned with, as opposed to this political leaning and gaining more power. So we need to be concerned for more humanity.
I think we should, but one of the problems with many organizations is something we study in business schools, and that is mission drift for nonprofit organizations based on large donors and contributions. One of the 800-pound gorillas in the room, I said one of them, there's several, is the fact that radical marriage reformers, gay rights activists, have started to pay attention to and give gifts to the NAACP. Their chairman has been a gay rights advocate. Back in 2008, I would never forget being on an airplane in one part of Florida, flying to another part, and getting a call from a writer from Essence magazine who asked a question: what is this problem and the bad blood between you and the NAACP? And I said to this young woman, I wasn't aware that there was a problem or that I had bad blood. I haven't done anything to them or said anything too bad at that point about them. And she said, no, well, we have received copies of letters. We're told that Julian Bond has sent out a letter to all the NAACP membership in the state of Florida, telling them not to attend your meetings, not to listen to anything that you're saying, because you are a conservative/Republican operative, number one. And looking back on it, life would have been so much easier if somebody had been stroking me one of those big checks, you know what I'm saying? Which, by the way, they weren't. But so they were saying all this, and I said, oh, really? Yeah. And then another person told me, oh, yeah, I just got this letter, and it says don't go to your meeting. And it was an interesting thing. So I found that they had an agenda that was totally informed by their self-interest, not the interest, if you will, of the African American community and the current problems. Well, our time's all up for today. Tomorrow, we're going to be talking about the 2008 financial crisis. Is it happening again? This has been Harry Jackson, Dave Parlett at the Harry Jackson Show. Tune in again tomorrow. God bless you.